Jim Krenn, No Restrictions with Tracie, Jayne, and on this episode, I'm really excited. This is one of over 250 episodes. This is my Hall of Fame episode, I think. Not that I have a Hall of Fame, or worthy of a Hall of Fame, but this could be, if there's a No Restrictions Hall of Fame episodes, this could be, I'm feeling it, because my friend here, Jayne Gunderson, am I saying the last name?
That's right.
Jayne Gunderson, from the comedy, the National Comedy Center, which is the real Hall of Fame for comedy. It's a $50 million structure, and I am honored to be. I got honored to be Pittsburgh's ambassador in 2012. So I am sort of Jayne's I'm kind of the ambassador to the National Comedy Center from Pittsburgh, because it said it's the greatest day trip you can make. If you want to do a day trip, if you're into comedy, you will not believe it. I can't even describe it. We're going to try to describe it. But Jayne, thank you for joining the show. It is kind of amazing that Comedy Center, isn't it?
Well, thank you for saying so, and I'm glad you think so as someone of the comedy community, because we were very intentional about that. In 10 years of raising money and building and designing, you would not be surprised how many ideas ended up on the cutting room floor because they were hokey or cheesy or not authentic to actually telling the story of comedy. And you know, comedians are a savvy, cynical bunch, as you know, who enjoys making fun of things. So for 10 years I was stressed out, if we do this badly, it becomes the biggest butt of a joke there could be.
Ever.
You know, right? And comedy is such an anti-establishment, irreverent, anti-institutional place that it was kind of scary to be building an institution for it.
You know, you're right. Comedians, this is long overdue. All comedians, or most of us, I'm included, very dysfunctional. And don't like to look at ourselves at all.
Right.
And thinking of honoring yourself, that's a weird thing. So thank God they have a place for comedians. Not only the greats, the legendaries, George Carlin, Rob Williams, and we'll talk about Joan Rivers in a minute. But the comedians like the Mitch Hedbergs of the world, or Gilbert Gottfried, very known, but still, some of the comedians that maybe aren't really complete household names, but they're just genius. So it's kind of cool that it's immersed with all these qualities. Your number one thing I think about that place, because there's quality there, and I think that's what you see when you show the community.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that one of the early dominoes was the donation of George Carlin's archive, which is this incredible thing of tens of thousands of scraps of paper and bar napkins and hotel stationery organized in Ziploc baggies by topic in his written hand.
Oh my God.
And so you could see his process with these joke files. So Kelly Carlin, his daughter, donated the joke files to us in 2016, and she had said a lot of places, a lot of institutions, a lot of people had approached her over the years intending to build something like this, but they were always kind of fly by night, or came and went, or didn't really have the right story of the craft in mind, and that's what appealed to her. That this museum and the storytelling and the experience there is more about the process and the craft of comedy, so that we can engender in the visitors an appreciation for how hard it is.
Right.
And I think the reason, someone asked me recently, why didn't comedians and why hasn't comedy gotten the same level of respect as other art forms? And my theory is that good comedy looks easy. If you're doing it well, it looks easy, whether it's a film scene that's funny or whatever. So I think people think comedians, and you're a stand-up,
it's just up there talking.
It looks like you're winging it when really no one has idea of the level of precision and honing and timing and all of the things that go into it.
And all the work. That's a great point. If you're wondering, in Pittsburgh where this is, in Jamestown, it's only a 2.5 hour drive. About 20 minutes from Lake Chicago. Some people may go, I thought that, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful.
And that's the point. There's a lot of things to do around us. We want to stay, make a weekend of it, have a nice little getaway, but it's also a great day trip. Like I said, it's go up, take the family. It's the cool thing about it is it's kind of interactive in a way.
May I ask you, Jayne?
Yeah.
A lot of people out there haven't heard about this museum, homage to this comedy world. And when I first heard about it, I lived in New York for 16 years, and I had a boss that had gone up to Jamestown for the weekend, and she came back raving and telling me, "Oh my gosh, you're in comedy. Have you been to this? Have you seen this museum? And could you please describe to people how it is interactive, because a lot of people haven't heard about this." So, okay, they're saying if somebody wants to go visit and they're hearing, oh, it's a comedy museum, tell them how it's different.
Okay, so you'll notice we didn't call it the National Comedy Museum.
Right.
For the very reason I think you're alluding to, that depending on who you use that word with, people sometimes have a negative association with the word museum because it sounds stuffy and static and boring.
Right.
And now if you've been to some of the few sort of really interactive museums in the world, maybe you have a positive connotation with that word, but we were really conscious of saying to ourselves, well, let's call it something more vibrant, because it is. So it's the National Comedy Center, but it is the nation's, as designated by the United States Congress, official museum and archive of comedy. But rather than it just being artifacts in glass cases, we personalized it. So when a visitor comes through the door, the first thing they do is a sense of humor profile exercise, where you're just tapping things on a kiosk that you find funny. That data is loaded onto an RFID chip that you wear around your wrist, a little bracelet called a laugh band, and that allows you to tap into exhibits throughout your stay, and the exhibits read the room just like any good comedian needs to, and take into account the sense of humor of the people in the space. And that notion came from producing more than 30 years of comedy festivals in Jamestown, the Lucille Ball Comedy Festival. So we had seen firsthand two people walk out of the same comedy show and have completely different opinions. You know, whether that was the funniest thing they'd ever seen or not funny at all. And you see that all the time, and people assert it like it's fact. So we knew it was personal and somewhat subjective, and that became the compass for the personalization. And then we decided also at a certain point that even though it was really interactive and immersive, and you're enjoying the clips and you're enjoying the work and actually laughing, there was a designer in the room, I remember saying, people still want to see the stuff. So we said, okay, what are we going to do? So we annotate this really interactive, tech-savvy experience with things in glass cases like Charlie Chaplin's cane, or Rodney Dangerfield's suit and red tie that he wore all the time, and his handwritten joke notes, pages of them, spilling out of his leather monogrammed duffel bag that he took on the road with him. So it's always about process too, where you're going, oh wow, behind the scenes Rodney Dangerfield had written in every centimeter of this paper, upper left hand corner, what a crowd, parenthesis 2x. Like he had written down that he's going to go to the stage and say, what a crowd, what a crowd. You know, you just don't expect that that's going on behind the scenes. Or Joan Rivers' professional papers.
And it's cool because like you get a Lewis, and now I've been there like 4 times. They have my history now, so it kind of build off that history. Yeah. Look on their Jim Krenn, so it's typed in my name again. So it's kind of cool. And speaking of Joan Rivers, you just got a Joan Rivers exhibit that's kind of like the Carlin thing. Now the Carlin thing was the thing that blew me away, because we talked about it a minute ago, but it was like going into his room or something like that, or his living room, and you're like looking around all those little notes. If you're a Carlin fan, it's worth a trip alone for the Carlin thing. It was fascinating. It's so deep as far as like you said, notes and things and personal. You really get a feel for the guy from just exploring that room. So the same thing is going on with Joan, right?
Yes, yeah. Among the crown jewels of comedy that exist on planet Earth in terms of archives, Joan Rivers' legendary joke file contains 65,000 jokes, typewritten from a typewriter on cards, organized, categorized, cross-referenced. I mean, this was like a professional working file cabinet built into her wall that she had, her joke file, and it's her jokes spanning 1950s through 2014. So you can also see like how her perspective evolves on different things as a woman. You know, early on, I think there were like 725 jokes on the topic of unmarried and in my 20s. You know, and nowadays that wouldn't be as much of a topic for a comedian, right? But when she was coming up, the fact that she was in her mid-20s and unmarried was huge fodder for material on Ed Sullivan in 1967. So I love that it's a time capsule of our culture. You can like learn our history and what was going on in our culture that was controversial at any given time because it's Joan Rivers and she doesn't shy away from what's controversial. And now we're building this interactive exploration where you can come to the Comedy Center and search through the files.
Well, Lucille Ball is a great actress and comedian in that sense, but there's a queen of stand-ups. She'd be in the run, like of Carlin, and Robin, whoever's the king, Seinfeld, whoever, like you said, it's very subjective, whatever you like. But I would say it's amazing how she transcended in the top business. And Tracie, it's tough for a woman. It's not.
Yeah,
it
it is tougher. It is tougher.
It is.
Really? It's not
I
easier?
heard that.
We're not babied and taken care of.
It's tough for an overweight guy with a low IQ too, but still, it's really tougher for women.
Yeah. Well, it is tough for everyone, and
yes.
I was just talking to somebody about this issue on a podcast recently about like whether it's still harder for women in comedy. And when I think about Joan Rivers in the 1950s, like, is there anything harder than that? I don't think so. But it probably, my theory, many people's theory on that is that it's a powerful thing to do. And so there's some people who just are averse to a woman being if you're the funniest person in the room, and if you're on stage and you're making everyone in the room laugh,
right.
There's nothing more powerful than that. And so there's an aversion some people have to just witnessing that power coming from a woman's voice. And so I just think it's not that they're not going to come along with you and figure out that you're funny, but I think female comedians have to overcome that hurdle first and be extra funny just to break through. And so Joan Rivers did it. The thing that's amazing about her career, who else stayed relevant and in the zeitgeist and in the news and everywhere, every year, every decade for that long? And you don't do that if you're not resilient, if you're not hardworking, if you don't have the work ethic, and if you're not really, really funny.
Kind of genius. Well, her material also, it skirted the edge just right. I mean, that's the hardest thing to do. That's where you want to be. You just skirt the edge. She's never over the edge. Well, I'm sure she went over at times, and that's why you have to give her a break on that, because she's walking on a little tightrope. And that's what I thought was cool about it. Just right to the edge. Just, not dirty, but just right to that edge. So she could put on TV most of her stuff anyway.
Well, and also,
I never saw her live in concert. That would be cool, but
because it was, I hate to say male dominated, because at that time there just weren't any females. But what a different perspective she had, which made her different and original as well. I mean, because a lot of what makes you stand up as a comedian is your different point of view.
Right.
So she was so different for that time as well. I mean, I can't wait to see it. But I have to nerd out for just a moment. So in college, so I'm a comedian, but in college I was actually an art history minor, and I was into museum studies. Oh. So I have to nerd out about the museum questions for just a second.
Yay, good.
I mean, so much of this is paper and the conservation of paper and artifacts. I mean, it must be a bit of a nightmare to try to figure out how you're going to keep all of this intact and save it.
That's right.
In the future.
Yeah, we are a non-profit, so no one's making money on this, and we have stepped up to be the institution that didn't exist for comedy until now. No one was preserving comedy's material history. The Smithsonian may have room for one item in the topic of comedy here and there, or per decade or something like that, but Carlin's joke notes were sitting in Kelly Carlin's garage. Carl Reiner, our archivists worked with his family to pull the archives from his home that had been there for 60 years. And who knows otherwise what would have happened.
Right.
Oftentimes things have just been auctioned off, and then it becomes disparate and you lose track of it. So, and there's so much to be learned from it. But yeah, our archives team is top notch, and we just recently got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, so we're making the case that this is important, just like the preservation of all kinds of other archives. Lewis Black calls us the Library of Congress of comedy, and so whether the analogy is we're what Cooperstown is to baseball, or the Rock Hall in Cleveland, we're also the Smithsonian of comedy, because no one was really preserving this stuff and preserving the stories of the heritage until now.
That's a good point, because we forget social media didn't exist back in the 50s and 60s. So was all like Carlin's notes or whatever, and like they're in the garage, they could easily have been destroyed. There's like great finds and now honored. Like Joan Rivers is gonna have. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I started doing stand-up in 2000 in Houston.
Wow.
And just how big the comedy world has grown since then. I feel like it's sort of grown as an art form since then, because when I started, there was a very small talent pool in Houston, and we had 3 or 4 comedy clubs in that one city. And there weren't that many comics, but then Last Comic Standing came out, Comedy Central was getting bigger, and that sort of grew this art form, you know, where before it was sort of this weird little niche kind of art form and everything. And now, you know, there's so many people who think, oh, sure, I'm a comedian, I could do comedy. And so it's good that it's getting this respect to show that, no, it's a bigger deal than you think. And here's this museum that will teach you just how hard it is.
Yeah.
How much work it is.
Yeah.
I'm 90 years old, so but in 1982 or 3, there's a Pittsburgh comic club that just started. Cable TV kind of just started too, in a way. HBO had like maybe Robin Williams on. That was it as far as, you know, comedians. And I remember the Pittsburgh Comedy Club as an MC. I got to work with all these people, but I remember Richard Belzer saying to me, he says, "Yeah, man, you're in the middle. You're beginning of rock and roll comedy. Like all these comedy clubs, 3, 4 clubs in each city. It's the birth of comedy." So we had comedy's been around forever, but there's this style of comedy. So this is gonna be big, and it was obviously. There's 3 or 4 clubs, and it enabled a guy like me. I grew up in Pittsburgh. It's not the entertainment capital. For me, it is. But you know, my mom and dad, you know, I love and adore it. You know, we're blue collar, and that's the way it is. The comedian was like a way far up. So you don't even know how it can be. But all of a sudden, this comedy club, you have a way to make a living.
Yeah.
And that's how I did it. I was able to, after college, after my 9 years of college, I barely graduated from my UT, and then I got in the car and went on the road. So, but I was able to make a living at it, and it was the birth for comedy in a way. You're right.
Yeah, and it's had these booms and then slowdowns in terms of the club scene, and that's why I think what we did recently was an important thing in storytelling to open the Caroline's Comedy Club exhibit from Caroline's on Broadway, because if the gym goes away, comedy suffers. Yeah. All the specials that people are watching on Netflix or on whatever content platform, they are not going to be as good if the club scene dies. Right. Because that is the gym, as you both know. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, for comedy. And so it's important that we celebrate the clubs, that we preserve them, that we support them by going out to see live comedy. Right. And it's also where experimentation happens and where the best material comes from. You can't go from a thought in your head to laying it down in a special without 100 hours on stage, tweaking it and honing it. And people don't know that, and you know, COVID didn't help. So we just cut the ribbon with Caroline Hirsch a week ago at the Comedy Center on the Carolines on Broadway exhibit. We preserved the iconic stage backdrop, that Harlequin pattern. Everyone knows it the instant they see it. Right. And this was a 40-year staple of the New York comedy scene. And she would do brilliant things like book the comics that were going to be on the late shows to come to the club, so that when they were on the late shows, they'd mention the club when she was really early starting out. But some of the best comedy in our comedy consciousness that we know from finished, polished albums started in that room and on that stage. And without it, again, comedy suffers. So we have to support the clubs and celebrate them as part of the story.
That's pretty cool. It really is. To showcase the clubs. You know, we'll see more, I'm sure, as years go on.
I could have swore I heard this. Correct me if I'm wrong. You have like some sort of a section just discussing and celebrating the Catskills and the Borscht Belt. Is it that true?
Yeah, we do sort of the history of all comedy. So going back to like the ancient Greeks and Shakespeare through the internet and animation today. And so you can't address the story of comedy without the Catskills and the Borscht Belt. And there are these. One of the cool things about the museum, and one of the things that, for example, Amy Poehler said after visiting, and she joined our advisory board, and when we had an onboarding sort of meeting later to bring her up to speed and get her involved as a board member, I said, why did you say yes to joining? And she said, it's the mix of old and new, and how you're making connections between the past and the present. And so it was just funny. Saul and I were talking earlier today, even about Frank Oz coming to the museum. So he's a guy who wrote or directed What About Bob and all these great films. But he also was everything from Yoda to Fozzie Bear to Miss Piggy. So one of these great, amazing people in comedy. And he said the Waka 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 of Fozzie Bear, he said he just came up with because he was trying to embody and exude sort of the energy of these Borscht Belt Catskills comedians who always had these little sound, catchphrases and things that they would annotate their routines with. And I thought, wow, that's just a funny comedy history story of Catskills and Borscht Belt meets the Muppets, meets film. And so the Comedy Center Museum is now the nexus for all of this.
We'll get back to talking about this wonderful museum, but Journey happens to be in town for the convention, not for, but it happens to be going on. The furry convention happens to be going on.
Yeah. Did you say that's why I'm in town? Let's go with that.
No,
let's go with it. Let's go with
we
that.
love the furries. But we were talking about it, and it's interesting. Hey, you want to dress up in a costume? That's cool with me. It's fine with us. But we were wondering, like, what animal, if I were a furry, what animal would we be? Like, it's your, it's your spirit animal, I guess, your alter ego animal, whatever. I chose koala bear.
Oh,
Koala bear?
Who wouldn't want to drink with a koala bear?
They have, like...
They love koala bear. Everyone loves a koala bear.
They have chlamydia.
You've
never heard of that?
Whatever.
the koalas at the convention?
I didn't know that.
No, koala bears for
in
real.
real life?
In
They
real
have
life,
antibiotics
koala
for it.
bears.
Probably the
Koala
ones
bear.
at the convention too.
That's not a stigma of the koala bear community, by the way.
Koala bears have chlamydia.
I take it back.
That is not a
Maybe
stigma
that's not
of
a
my
good thing.
koala bear community. It's because you don't like it. I'm telling you, we don't talk about that in my koala bear group.
What happened to the bear cat?
I do like, that's true, I do like Bearcat too. I do like Bearcat because Journey was in for one of the greatest show, right? Pittsburgh today. We love Pittsburgh Today Live. I love them. Love being on the show. Journey was there promoting, and I've been on. They've been, helped me so much in my career, through my career at Pittsburgh Today, KDK, had me on the show. And one time I was on the show and they did the green room thing, and this woman, the nice woman from the zoo, brought this animal, and it was a bear cat. I didn't know what it was. It looked fun and furry, and it was in a cage, and it was around and sitting there, and she leaves, and he looked so friendly. I opened up the thing, and he's sitting on my lap, and I'm petting him, and she comes back in, and she goes, "Sure, don't move." I'm like, holding the bear tail. What's, I didn't know what it was. I'm like looking around, like, what is something around here? What? And she goes, "You're slow." She goes, "He could have ripped your throat out." I go, "What?" He's a bear cat. He could rip your throat out in a second.
The green room of morning television here is kind of insane. I have to put down my lint roller to tell what happened next. But it's true. I've been operating a lint roller ever since this morning because I walked into that same green room surrounded by furries.
There's furries
Surrounded
everywhere.
by furries. But you sound like you had a Johnny Carson, Joan Embry experience.
I did.
Because Joan Embry, the woman everyone remembers from Carson,
Yes.
as the animal woman who come out with the animals, she came to Jamestown last August to help us cut the ribbon on the Johnny Carson exhibit. And I think she was among the people I've been most excited to meet in my life. It was just this legendary moment. And so we did a stage show in Jamestown with all of these acts and performers whose lives were changed by going on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, which is so central to his story of comedy because that doesn't exist today in the same way, where if you went on Carson, your life was never the same after that moment because he was the king of late night. Everyone was watching. It wasn't as fractured as it is today, and he really set the template for late night. So whether it's The Passing Zone, a comedy juggling duo, or Lance Burton, the magician, or Joan Embry, all of these people gathered in Jamestown with Jeff Sotzing, Carson's nephew, and we cut the ribbon on the exhibit. And what's cool is that, so we are this nonprofit museum, right? So we're asking people to participate and help tell these stories. For the Johnny Carson exhibit, Jimmy Fallon said yes to being the hologram host.
Okay.
So we went to 30 Rock and shot this with Jimmy right after he finished taping The Tonight Show a year ago. He's the host of the exhibit. You're in an immersive theater where you're surrounded by the story. And the other people who agreed to do interviews just 1 year ago for this exhibit that we just opened were Mel Brooks in his home, Steve Martin, Jay Leno, Bette Midler, who was famously Johnny's last guest, and in that interview decided to donate the wardrobe she wore, on the final show. Let's see, we had Martin Short, Byron Allen, who was a stand-up on Carson when he was 17 years old. And so the exhibit is magnificent. And then we approached NBC and found that they still had the iconic rainbow curtain. So when you go to Jamestown now, not only are you immersed in the story and you're seeing a hologram host and all of this, you walk out and you're standing there and you're like, is this the real curtain? And it is. The rainbow iconic curtain is their wardrobe from the show. It's a really fantastic exhibit.
It's funny talking about how big it was and how it changed people's lives. It's so great you had that exhibit for people that are younger than that never knew this. There was only 3 channels on television, but I was watching the documentaries recently. The AFC Championship game, whatever, it's like 40 million people. He had that every night with between 30 and 40 million viewers, they said. Think about that. It's an AFC Championship game every single night. Great.
Right.
So, yeah, that changed your life. So it's cool that you're honoring that icon, this iconic show. It's kind of be fun. I just want to see the curtain.
I know. Yeah, there are people who would travel because that's the feedback we've gotten. Like, I'd drive to Jamestown just to stand and take a photo in front of the curtain. Or go in the theater and have this amazing exhibit. One of the cool things when you exit the immersive theater is all of the Rolodex cards that the Office kept. So throughout people's careers. So you're seeing Don Rickles' little file card from the Office of the Tonight Show, and with a typewriter, every date that he was on the show, and then hand scrawls about like how he did. But you're looking at Robin Williams' card, you're looking at Jerry Seinfeld's card, looking at Bette Midler's card, George Carlin. So we have this entire hallway just of those cards, which is so fun to look at.
I have to make a little bit of a circle here to go back to, I think my spirit animal.
I was going to
yes. Yeah, we didn't get
I want to get to see what you guys are.
Well, I'll make a point in a second.
Okay.
But I think mine is Fozzie Bear. I have a Fozzie Bear Halloween costume. What's the second
Does
one?
Fozzie Bear
So do I.
Do you
No,
really?
true. The fact that we're on a podcast right now and 2 people who both have been Fozzie Bear for Halloween is a little uncanny.
Does
That's
Fozzie-
insane.
does-
Oh yeah,
does-
legitimately.
Does Fozzie
I've
Bear
been
have
Fozzie Bear.
chlamydia?
We should be friends. So, what? No, Fozzie
I
Bear
just didn't know.
doesn't
I'm just
have
asking.
chlamydia.
A bear
But-
family.
But so, I mean, Fozzie Bear, yes, definitely. I think that would be my. I don't know if the
I think that'd be
furries would
great.
accept that.
Well, it's
as
not
a
that. They
furry.
would accept it as a furry, I believe.
But
I'm not
that's okay.
speaking for
If I
furries.
have
They
to be
may.
a weird splinter group of furries just because I'm Fozzie Bear, I'm okay with
You're
that.
on the same wavelength as me. I want
no,
a costume
you do you.
to drink with. You say, I want to drink with that Fozzie Bear and that koala bear.
Right.
I want to have a beer with them. They're not going to beat me. They're not going to eat me or kill me or
So because of
whatever.
that, now I have to ask: is there something on the Muppets? Is there something on
Oh,
Fozzie
yes.
Bear?
Oh,
We have had actually,
Oh, yeah.
we had it on loan, so it's just gone back. We rotate the artifacts. So that's the other thing. If you've been before, it's different every time you go to the Comedy Center. We actually had the actual Fozzie Bear
We
up
gotta
it
drive up
on
for that
display in a display case. You would have lost it.
Yeah.
I would
It's
have been in
amazing.
tears.
It's too
Yeah.
much on you. Yeah.
And that's the coolest
It's a
thing.
spirit
That we
animal.
would watch people walk by as families, and there were kids who were like 7 years old losing it when they'd see Fozzie Bear. People our age losing it when they'd see Fozzie Bear. People my parents' age losing it when they see Fozzie Bear. And that's rare to have multi-generational reactions to something in comedy like that. And all I can think with this spirit animal thing is like, is Miss Piggy furry enough that I could be her?
Is that your spirit?
Well, it would be, but I've been
I think
mentally
I think-
like pondering. I don't know if there's enough fur involved to be Miss Piggy.
We are counting Muppets
I have to
in
find
this.
someone else. Sam Eagle, feathers. No.
We're counting Muppets in this thing.
They're birds. They're birds that are furries. I think.
You think there's not an Elmo down at the convention center? There's probably 10 right now.
I don't know.
Meeting.
I don't know. Tickets are expensive. But
No, they sell out. It's big.
No.
You may not know I'm a secret furry. I am a koala. I'm kidding.
Well, the anonymity is very appealing. I will say that.
Okay, so now I have an odd question about the museum.
Now you have an odd question.
Yeah, like that wasn't odd enough. Okay, now I'm gonna get weird.
Good,
So
Fozzie.
when I started comedy, as a kid, seriously, I loved Fozzie Bear. He was, I loved Miss Piggy. I wanted to be Miss Piggy,
Yes,
but I wanted
such
to
a
be
diva.
funny, like Fozzie Bear. When I was in the 6th grade, that's when Bill Cosby himself came out on HBO, and I remember with just my dad and I sitting in the den laughing. I mean, you know, here we are, decades apart. You know, it's my generation, and both of us laughing just as hard. That was a big moment for me, and I think that was a big part of why I became a stand-up comic. How do you address controversial comics that, you know, started out these icons and, you know, their
That's a great question.
It is a great question.
Trace, like O.J. Simpson, not all
Right, like what
it's interesting.
Yeah,
Huh?
we were right in the middle of very fast-paced production on the museum, right? Turning it from a construction site into a living, breathing institution when Cosby went on trial. So it was in the moment trying to figure out how to handle him and so many others. The good news for us was we never built the museum to be designed by glorification of the individual. If you go there, it's not like it's like, here's the Jerry Seinfeld exhibit, and here's the Robin Williams exhibit, and oh no, we have to cancel or decide what to cancel. It's organized by genre of comedy, and from the beginning, in fact, we talked about whether to call it a museum. The origin of the idea in Jamestown was to call it the Comedy Hall of Fame. And we evolved past that because we knew from talking to comedians themselves, there's already a weird and awkward relationship between comedians and awards. You know, the Oscars traditionally snub comedies. Like, you can write the best comedy film, unlikely to win the Oscars. So there's already this aversion, as you mentioned, about looking at themselves and taking honors and distinctions seriously. So we took the approach of more of an art museum, where it's about the work and the work product. And let's talk about the results rather than the glorification of the person. You know, let's make it about the craft and the work that they produce. So, for example, the onus on us is to the storytelling and the history and the heritage. So you can't tell the story of comedy on television without talking about the Cosby Show. It was foundational. It's a huge part of comedy story, particularly on television. But then there were other areas. So our compass became, when it's necessary for storytelling and the authenticity to comedy's heritage, we err on the side of including, not excluding. But there were places where, for example, we had been building an exhibit on using your face in comedy. It's facial recognition, and it's about making people laugh without saying a word. And if you study this, there's so many comedians who are really, really good with their faces. There were places like that where we could have picked any number of 100 comedians, where we thought, well, let's make choices that are intentional there, where it isn't like necessary for the storytelling to have a Bill Cosby mimic his face on a huge screen, for example.
Wow.
I'm sorry to say if that disappoints anyone, but these are really tough issues. But the good news is, you're going to see it all at the Comedy Center. In fact, in the Blue Room, the basement of the museum, it's the uncensored experience in comedy. So we lean into the story of what has been most controversial in comedy's heritage and what jokes in comedy have been most boundary pushing. So a good example is Louis C.K. is featured, he has a great bit on 9/11 because we have an exhibit on the concept of too soon. When is it too soon to joke about a tragedy? So there's a whole exhibit on this topic. And because Louis has a very famous bit that many people regard as really funny about 9/11, to do that exhibit absent of that material wouldn't have been doing justice to the story of comedy. So, we had to think really hard about it, but our onus is to the storytelling authenticity.
That's fantastic. Jayne Gunderson, thank you for being on our show. If you're listening at the end of the show, you're going to have to want to go to the Comedy Center, National Comedy Center. It's in Jamestown. It's 2.5 hours from Pittsburgh. Easy drive. Great place to stay for the weekend. You can't get it all in one. You have to stay there. It would take you 10 trips or whatever to really. You can get lost in the George Carlin room alone, in the Joan Reapers room. So we learned from Fozzie Bear and
Two Fozzie Bears.
And Miss B.
Yeah.
And a koala bear without chlamydia. We have our spirit
So he
animals
says.
out.
So he says.
So I say, my secret.
Wait till the convention's over this weekend.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
This was amazing. I can't wait.
Love having you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jody.